Hey, it's Verity here from the creative team and welcome back to the WowEmbossingPowder YouTube channel. Foil is such a great way to add some shine to your cards, and I've got 3 techniques today showing you how to add some fun foiled frames to your cards to add a focal area to your sentiments and stamps. So let's get started. So as I said, I am using some Fab Foils. These are from WowEmbossingPowders and I'm using the copper, blush and rose gold foils, which are all beautiful sort of pinks, reds and coppery colours. Great for this time of the year. So I'm going to add my frames with 3 different ways today. The first way I'm going to add my frame is to use the mixed media brush to create a frame by just painting a sort of rough circle onto the card. And I've drawn a pencil line just roughly to guide me as I'm using the brush to paint the Wow Clear Ultra Slow Drying Embossing ink onto the card. So this brush is a bit like a nail polish brush and it's great for mixed media and it's great for creating your own designs and own backgrounds. And I'm doing this in quite a loose fashion. I kind of want it to be a bit loose, a bit sketchy, a bit rustic and look a little bit like a wreath when I come to foil it. Now you can see where you are adding the ink. It has got a shine to it, and as you tilt it in the light you'll be able to see where you've been placing it. It's a bit harder to see on screen, but you can see as I tilt the paper up you can see where it's shiny, and that's where I've drawn my circle. So once I've completed my sort of semicircle on this card, I'm then going to cover this with bonding powder. So bonding powder is from WowEmbossingPowder and it acts quite similar to embossing powder. It's a much more finer particle and you cover it over the embossing ink and it will stick to that embossing ink just like embossing powder does. Once you've tapped off all your excess, you can then heat set this with your dual speed heat gun. Use heat setting 2. As I say, it's just like an embossing powder, so it will all melt as the heat gets it. Now I'm not melting all of the powder in one go, I'm doing it in sections. So once the bonding powder is heated, it stays sticky for some time. So this allows you to put the Fab Foil over the top, and then I'm just using a bone folder just to burnish the foil down over the bonding powder. And as you peel it off, the foil sticks to that powder and you get a lovely shine. Now obviously when you're putting your foil down, you want to make sure you've got the pretty colour side facing upwards. And I'm doing this in sort of stages because it will start to cool down the bonding powder, and by the time you pop the foil on over the top it may not catch in all of the areas. So there I like to do it in sort of little stages just to get the best foil possible. And as I say, this, because I use the mixed media brush, I get quite a nice rustic look to the foiling and to the circle, and I really love the look of this. So I just keep heating the powder up, applying my foil and then burnishing it with my bone folder. And as you can see, for the end product I have this really beautiful foiled circle frame offset to one side, and it's very flat and looks like it's almost been printed on the paper. Okay, so for the second technique, before I actually do the foiling, I need to just prep the background because I'm going to use the frame to sort of frame off an area of a scene. And I want to create a sky and a ground. So I'm using some post-it notes to frame off a diamond in the middle of the card. And then I've also used a post-it note just to frame off the bottom half where I want to then create a sky and some grass. So I'm using my Also New ink blending brush and I'm applying It's a Boy Catherine Pooler ink into the masked area, and I'm just starting off on one edge nice and softly, and I'm going to create a lighter blue at the horizon line, and then I'm going to add another colour at the top. So I'm just going in with some circular motions just to get a lovely soft blue, and I'm just speeding this up to show that it does take a little bit of time to build your colour up. Then I'm coming in from the top of the diamond to add Suede Shoes Catherine Pooler ink, so it's a lovely darker blue. So I'm just blending between the two and I'm just going back in, layering up the colour and building that darker colour up. Once I'm happy with the skyline, I can then remove the mask at the bottom and then reposition it over the sky so I do not get any ink on my sky, and I can then ink blend my green area. So for this, I'm just using Garden Party Catherine Pooler ink Again, using one of the blending tools. This one I just keep for green inks, and I'm just softly blending the Garden Party on. And I'm not using 2 shades of colour on this area because it's a much more smaller area. If I want a bit of depth and dimension, I can just soften my blending in certain areas to create a lighter area and add more ink in other areas for a darker area. But because it's so small, I'm not doing any fancy blending here. Okay, so once I've removed all the post-it notes, I now have a lovely area that's quite flat, but I want to add a nice fun foiled frame to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm using these thin foam strips from Dari's, and what I will do is I will place these around the edge of my ink blending little scene, and then I'm making sure that they sort of fit the same edge of the square. So I'm placing one piece of strip on each side of the square. Then I'm using my scissors just to cut that down where it overhangs. And then I'm keeping the release paper on the top of them at the moment. So I've now got my 3D foam frame in place, and I'm just taking the release paper off one of those strips and adding some rose gold Fab Foil over the top. And I'm just burnishing this down over that foam pad. So it's got an adhesive side to it, which foam pads do. So we can use this adhesiveness to adhere foil. Because it's sticky, the foil would adhere to it. So I'm just burnishing it down just to get a really good adherence. And then sometimes it can be a little bit hard just to initially peel the release paper off the foil up when it's on these foam pads. But once you get that initial pull and it releases, it will come off really easily. And then you have this beautiful foiled area. Now, I didn't quite align my foil up, and I got a bit of area where there wasn't any foil on the adhesive. Wasn't a problem, just reposition it over that adhesive foam, burnish it down again, and the foil will stick there, covering up any areas of imperfections. So I'm just repeating this around the frame, again removing that release paper, then positioning the foil down over the top of it, burnishing it with my finger or a bone folder if you want a really good adherence. And then I'm just peeling the release paper, the foil release paper up to reveal the beautiful 3D foam foiled frame. Okay, so the final way to add a foiled frame to your card is to use toner peel and stick adhesive sheets. So the toner will allow the foil to adhere to it when we add heat. So I'm going to use 2 nesting square dies. And I'm going to die cut this out of a piece of toner peel and stick adhesive. And the peel and stick is really great because you don't need to add anything else to it, to the back, to be able to adhere it to your card. I'm using a little bit of washi tape just to keep my square dies in place because I'm going to use this to then also die cut out of white card a couple more of these frames just because I want to add a bit of dimension to my card. So this is a great way of getting the same effect on the previous card, but if you don't have the adhesive strips. So once I've die cut that out, I've got a nice black square frame. Now, to be able to foil this, we need to apply the foil with some heat. And for this, I'm going to use my Mink foiling machine. Now, you can use a laminator if you have got one. You just need to heat it up for a period of time, and that will depend on what laminator you have. When I've got my Mink machine on, I've switched it on to number 3. It's currently red at the moment, saying it's heating up, and when it turns green, I know it's ready to use. Now, to foil this through my Mink machine, I use a carrier sheet. So the Mink machine comes with some plastic carrier sheets, but you could use a folded piece of paper if you wanted to. And I just open this up to place my frame in, and then I can add some foil over the top. So for this frame, I am using the Blush Fab Foil, which is a lovely metallic pink. It's such a gorgeous colour. I really love this kind of foil colour. And I'm just cutting a piece that's big enough to cover the frame. Now, obviously, it's not going to use that much foil because there will be a large space in between. So you can keep that foil off cut and still use it again. Even though you run it through the foil machine, it's not adhered to anything. So it will react again next time you need to do it. So you won't waste any of your foil, which is brilliant. Once it's in my carrier sheet, I'm just feeding it into my Mink machine. This will feed it through, apply heat and pressure to get a really good foil. And obviously the magic happens when you bring it out of your ink machine or your laminator, open it up and then peel off that foil transfer sheet, and you see the lovely foiled frame in front of you. So as I said, I also die cut the same frame out of white cardstock twice, and I'm just using some liquid adhesive just to layer these on top of each other so I can create a dimensional frame. Now, as I mentioned, the toner sheets that I use were peel and stick adhesive sheets. So I can peel the back off the foiled frame, and that will allow me to then adhere it down. I don't need to get any glue on the back, which if you get any glue on your foil, it can sort of give it a sort of tarnished, mattish look to it. So this is a great way of ruining your foiled frame. So then I'm just adding this to my white card base, and I decided to offset my frame to one side slightly just to make it look like you're peeking into the stamp scene when I create it. So for this card I have used the Hero Art Snowy Town stamp set, and I've placed the actual lake onto my card panel, but I'm just placing the other stamps that I want to create in the scene on top just to determine the layout of my scene. And I'm placing two of the buildings beside the actual lake. Now I'm stamping the lake in Suede Shoes Catherine Poole ink, and I've done this twice, just inking up with a few love taps, stamping it down, and then once I've done that, I'm then also inking the edge up with a little bit of juniper mist and stamping this down, and it just gives it a little bit more dimension and definition to the lake, so it's not completely flat. In addition, and then I stamped those two buildings in some more Catherine Poole ink. So this was icing on the cake for the roofs, and then over coffee for the actual walls of the buildings, just to give it a little bit more interest, having the roof in a different colour. And then to finish off the scene, I'm also adding a little lamppost and two of the figures skating on the lake. I'm stamping these in blackjack ink just to create a silhouette look to it. Now to add a little bit more dimension to the stamping, so it doesn't look like they're just kind of floating there in the air, I'm using a few alcohol markers in cool greys just to add a little bit shadows to the buildings and to the lampposts, just to ground them a little bit more. And I'm using two shades of a cool grey, and then I'm just using a blender brush just to soften the edges out and blend the edges out so they're not so harsh. Okay, so for the foiled frame card I created with the Doris foam strips, I've stamped the hut from the Happy Autumn's Forest Hero Arts stamp set in blackjack ink, and then I'm just using some of my Faber-Castells to add some colouring to this. And I'm adding sort of a darker brown to the roof, and then a lighter brown to the actual wooden cabin part, and adding a little red door and colouring in the windows. This just gives it a little bit of definition, it gives it a little bit of character, and I think it really finishes the little scene off, having coloured this in with pencils as opposed to my alcohol markers, because they're quite nice and soft, and it blends with that soft ink blending in the background. I'm not going to show you all the colouring because this is more about the techniques of the foiled frames. Once I completed the colouring of the house, I then foam mounted it onto the middle of the scene. To finish all the cards off, I'm heat embossing a selection of sentiments onto black cardstock using my clear ultra slow drying embossing ink, and then I'm covering this with opaque bright white embossing powder to get a lovely bright white sentiment popping off the black cardstock. So I've stamped the Thankful from Catherine Poole's Autumn Blessings stamp set, and I also stamp a selection of the leaves and twigs and little acorns from this stamp set onto some white cardstock in a selection of greens and brown inks to then fussy cut out for the card. And I'm adding these to the front of the card with some foam pads just to add some dimension. And I'm using that frame as though it's kind of a autumn wreath to an extent. I also added the stamp sentiment so just above, just to finish off that sentiment. The other sentiments come from the Hero Arts Happy Autumn Forest stamp set, and I stamped Sending Warm Hugs and Happy Autumn Birthday. Okay, so to finish all 3 of the cards off, I'm using some of my Tonic Studios Clear Morning Dew Nouveau drops and adding these and scattering these around the cards. I hope today has shown you 3 different ways of adding foiled frames to your cards, and that there's one technique that you can try in your next paper crafting adventure. Foil is such an elegant accent to add to a card, and there are so many ways to add it that it can look effortless. So in the comments below, let me know which is your most favourite way to add foil to your cards. If you enjoyed today's video, why not give it a thumbs up and think about subscribing to the channel. Also hit that bell icon so you'll be notified when the next video is up. If you want to check out my own channel, Pretty Little Button, I've included a link here as well as down below. For 10% discount at the Wow Embossing Powder shop, just use the code you can see on screen. You'll find a list of supplies and link in the description box below. Until next time, happy crafting!